from Business in the Community. We'd like to welcome you here this morning. I'm going to hand over to Sara now. She's going to do some housekeeping instructions.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you very much indeed to everybody for joining us. I just want to draw your attention firstly to the fact that we're going to record this session. We have had a lot of interest in it, but as you can see at the moment, we've got about 51 participants. We did have 100 odd, over 100 people have registered. So for anybody that's maybe not able to make the event this morning, we are recording it and we'll be sending out a link to that later on. We have got everybody on mute. As you appreciate, we've only got 1 hour for this session today, and we want to try and get through as many questions as we possibly can. So what we would ask you to do is use the chat function that's on the side, at the right-hand side of your screen. And if you could direct the questions to Deborah Burgess. Deborah gives us a wee wave up in the corner there from the NIACRO. Deborah's going to be looking at the questions coming in and making sure that we kind of field them through to the right people as they are appearing. So if you could direct those directly to Deborah and not on the general chat, that would be appreciated. Once we finish the event today, over the next, probably not today, I suspect it'll be tomorrow or Friday, we'll be following up the event with a blog or a kind of a document that will cover everything that we have done today. So all the questions that have been asked, we'll have the questions and the answers. And if there's any questions that have been asked we haven't managed to get to, we'll put the information for that in that document as well. We'll also be sending out a link to the recording so that you can watch it again if you would like. If you want any more detailed information, this is only an hour. It's a snapshot. We've got our experts on the panel here today. If you have got any other more detailed information that you're looking for, Jonny and I will be running a further workshop on the 26th of May. It's a 3-hour workshop and it goes into this in a little bit more detail. And we'll put the link to that workshop into the email follow-up as well. We're also going to do a tweet just at the end of the event to thank everybody for participating. If you would like to be included for participating in today's event, if you could put your Twitter handle into the chat, we'll make sure that you get mentioned in that tweet as well. And finally, we are going to be doing a Survey Monkey. Feedback is really important for events like this, that if we're doing any more, we can make sure we cover everything that needs to be covered. So there's going to be, the Survey Monkey will have a link in the chat towards the end of the session. If you wouldn't mind just taking a couple of minutes to complete that, we'd really appreciate your support. We'll also put a link to that in the follow-up email as well. And I think that's me covered everything. Over to you, Jonny.
Great, thank you. So very welcome to those of us who have just joined. My name is Jonny from NIACRO. I'm co-hosting today with Sara. We just want to take a couple of minutes now to introduce our panel of experts. So the first person I'm going to ask to introduce themselves is Tom Clarke, General Manager of AccessNI. Tom.
Tom will need to unmute.
Yep, thank you, Jonny. In fact, you've more or less introduced me. I'm Tom Clarke. I'm the General Manager in AccessNI, which is the criminal history disclosure service for Northern Ireland. And our job is really to help promote safer recruitment. And that's about it, as much as I need to say.
Thank you, Tom. And Sara from Business in the Community and would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, mine's going to be a little bit more detailed. I'm afraid, Tom, I'll ramble a little bit more. So I'm Sara Neilson, and I'm the Employability Manager at Business in the Community in Northern Ireland. I've got about 15 years experience of working in the employability arena, and through that supporting people with barriers to move into work. Since I joined Business in the Community last year, my main focus has been on challenging and supporting employers to embrace an inclusive growth agenda. Hopefully this will provide a better opportunity for everyone seeking employment and including those facing multiple barriers, for example, maybe having a criminal record. I'm leading the Ban the Box campaign here in Northern Ireland following its success in England over the last 7 years. So Ban the Box is about giving people with criminal convictions a chance. There are more than 11 million people in the UK who have a criminal record, and two of the biggest influencing factors when it comes to reducing reoffending are making sure they have somewhere to live, and the second one is employment. So Ban the Box is aiming to give people who have a criminal record a fairer chance at securing that work, and by encouraging companies to consider if and when and how they ask the question about criminal records during their recruitment processes, and reducing the risk of unfair discrimination and overlooking potential talent. I'll be happy to answer any questions any of you have about the Ban the Box campaign and the things you and your organisation should look at if you're considering signing up to the campaign at all. That's me.
Fantastic, thank you, Sara. And now could we hear from Roisin Lavery from the Equality Commission, please? Thanks, Roisin.
Thanks, Jonny. Good morning, everyone. My name is Roisin Lavery and I work for the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland. So for those of you who don't know who we are the non-departmental public body, and really our role is to encourage equality of opportunity. So our powers really derive from a number of statutes that protect people from discrimination on various grounds: age, race, religion and political opinion, gender, and that includes gender reassignment, disability and sexual orientation. So my particular role is within our advice and compliance division. So I work for the advisory services team, and I'm sure some of you have attended some of our employer training. Our services are free and they cover all employers in Northern Ireland. So we run a wide range of equality law sessions that you can book on our website. And we also have a free and confidential inquiry line. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to answer any questions in relation to this area or equality, anything that you have. And thanks really to Sara and Jonny for inviting the Equality Commission along. I hope you enjoy the event, folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roisin. So could we now hear from Vicky Johnston from Farrans, Northstone, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Vicky Johnston. I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Lead for Farrans Construction, and we are part of the Northstone Group. So we feel quite passionately about the rehabilitation of prison leavers, and that is why we have been a sponsor of Ban the Box and have been quite involved in Ban the Box in Northern Ireland. We work right across the UK, so we work in Scotland and England in Ireland, and we have employment programs in all of our areas, and we work both in civil engineering and building. So we do have quite big projects in different areas across the UK, and we like to think that we will bring investment into the local area through our employment programs, and this being one strand of what we do is the employment of prison leavers. So we're happy to be here today to answer any questions on our experience of what we have done in the past and what we're looking to do in the future. So I hope you enjoy the webinar today. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicky. And I suppose I better introduce myself. My name is Jonny Pardoe. I am a disclosure specialist with NIACRO. And what I do is I help people to understand criminal records and how it affects them. So that's everything from employers, volunteering, insurance, that kind of thing. I also run a helpline. I suppose the main thing I want to get across in my opener here today is that you know, there was 29,000 cases ended up in the courts in 2019, 2020, according to DOJ figures, and less than 10% of those were prison sentences. So the vast majority of people who have a criminal record may never have been in prison. So, and also just to say that on the helpline, I would get all sorts of people. I get accountants, doctors, solicitors, occupational therapists, builders, sales reps, all sorts of people. So the area of criminal records is not simply just people who have been in prison or from a certain socio-economic background. It is very, very much across the board. I've even had barristers and solicitors use the helpline. I like to give impartial advice. So I also know the importance of safeguarding, and that, you know, the rules are kept and risk assessments are done, because I have a sister with special needs and I want to make sure that, you know, people looking after my sister have been properly vetted. So I'm not against vetting at all. I just want to see people being given a fair chance and things being looked into properly, rather than just being dismissed because they've ticked a box. So that's me. Just to let you know, the way we're operating today is that if you have a question, if you could, Deborah Burgess, if you go into the chat function, if you go down to the bottom of your screen and hit chat, and then you can select from a list of who to talk to. And if you could put your questions to Deborah Burgess from NIACRO, she will kind of keeping things running behind the scenes for us. As Sara said, we won't be able to answer all questions today, but we are going to take a note of any questions that come in, and we will be responding and sending something out to everybody. So I'm going to hand back over to Sara.
Okay, well, we'll get things started. As Deborah will get questions as they come in, but I'll just kick things off with the first question. Jonny, this one's for you. So brace yourself. What stages of recruitment or what stages of the recruitment process are more likely to negatively impact on an applicant with a criminal conviction?
Thanks, Sarah. So in 2019, we did a survey of employers in Northern Ireland. We had 115 verified confirmed responses, and 82% of employers said that they would ask on application form whether someone had a criminal record or had convictions. And this is generally the biggest hurdle for people to get past shortlisting. And by asking so early on in the process about criminal records, it sort of clouds the decision-making process, we feel. And Sarah will go into this later on, but by asking somebody so earlier on, we are not just looking at the skills and experience and knowledge that that person has, but we're also looking at the criminal record so early on. And I suppose, if you do that, the chances are you could rule out people that are perfectly capable and would be brilliant staff, but because they've ticked a box, it looks like maybe I don't want to meet this person, I don't want to interview this person. So I think the biggest hurdle would be at that starting point before even checks have been done or anything like that. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask a question now. So what are the business benefits of hiring someone with a criminal conviction? And I'll direct that to Sara and to Vicky.
Vicky, do you want to go first, or do you want me to kick it off?
Yeah, I'm sure I can do it. Go first. So I suppose speaking from Farrans, we work in the construction sector, so we tender for a lot of public contracts, so it's public money, and we also have some private clients, but there are more. Government bodies are realizing that whenever we invest millions of pounds into a local area, whilst we are building that infrastructure, or there is that new fit into the process of the construction to ensure that there is benefit to that local community in that local area. So they're realizing more and more that there needs to be social return on investment. And this started to filter into contracts, but really it wasn't specific and didn't really focus on needs in that area, specifically to that area. So more and more it's starting to come through. And I suppose we got the ball rolling in terms of making impact in local areas with our jobs by being the forefront of the employment of ex-offenders and prison leavers. So really for us, it helped give us a competitive edge in that way, that we are showing that we can make social impact on our jobs. We're aware that, whenever we have a big project, we will have a big workforce. And the fact is that we can have that level of support for people coming from an offending background. We can give them a level of support, and we work with strategic partnerships with NIACRO, and then obviously with Advantage, NI with Julie and Nikki over there, I can see on camera, that we can give that level of support, and we can give those employment opportunities whilst we have them in those local areas. The only disadvantage for us is the fact that we have a project and then we move on to a different project, we move on to a different area. So it has brought definite business benefits for us, definitely, in terms of showing that we can provide those opportunities, and that we're willing to provide those opportunities to clients who really want to see that now, and they want to see that contractors are doing this kind of work.
I'll just add on to that, Jonny, that certainly from the work that we've done with employers, a lot of them are saying that if any people that they have taken on with a criminal or an offending background that they know about, they tend to find that those employees are more loyal to the organisation. And often it's because quite often somebody with an offending background has to jump through quite a few hoops to talk about, if they're talking about their convictions, talking about disclosing that. It's a difficult thing to have to discuss, and if you're having to do that with an employer, you don't really want to have to do it often. If you're doing it once, you really don't want to have to keep repeating it. So if they find that they have managed to get a secured employment, then that they'll do their utmost to stay with that employer. They'll be a loyal and hardworking employer for that person. And the other thing, obviously, kind of probably more legislative wise, it certainly does make a difference and helps with diversity and inclusion. It's allowing you to demonstrate that you have got a diverse and inclusion policy, that you are considering people from all backgrounds in your local community, and it will kind of help ensure that you're kind of equality of recruitment is in place. So that's what, just from the employers we're working with, that's the sort of experiences that we're finding.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think you have a question now, Sara.
I do. Roisin, this one is for you. So what equality principles apply to recruiting people with criminal convictions?
Okay, well, I would say this is a very generic, straightforward answer. And you're talking about equality of opportunity. And actually, we're all very familiar with this terminology, but how many of us can really, really, really robustly demonstrate that we act like one, that we act like an equal opportunities employer? So our advice is very straightforward. It is a point on the merit principle, and that is selecting the best person for the job as judged by objective selection criteria. Now note that you have interrogated, because you may set skills levels, qualifications, experience. However, you still need to justify those. If you're asking, so think about people who have convictions. Think about it if you ask for recent experience. There, you've got an immediate negative impact immediately. So you're going to have to justify any criteria that you set. You have to do this for equality grounds anyway. So if you're really a good practice employer, if you really want to embrace equality of opportunity, all you have to do, you do this in your processes for recruitment anyway, and if you don't, you should, extend it to think about your equality impact assessing this really. How might this negatively impact on somebody who has a conviction? And are there other ways to demonstrate a particular competency? You know, lots of organizations have adjusted a number of criteria because actually they don't really, they're hard to measure and they don't really demonstrate a competency. So the other thing that we would say is think about positive action. Think about, Jonny's already talked about the barriers that are put in place immediately when someone sees that ticking of a box about conviction. There's an immediate, someone will maybe immediately turned off and won't even apply. So we're all familiar with the term welcome statements. We all use them to address the underrepresentation of a particular group within the composition of our workforce. So really, if you're a good practice employer, which I say you're all here for the right reasons, you probably are, put a welcome statement out there, welcome applications, be specific, because if an individual sees that immediately on any advert that you write, they're going to think, actually, I haven't seen that and I don't see that very regularly. I have a chance of applying, I might be treated fairly here. But do you know what? People will be very familiar with our messages around the merit principle. There's always an assumption that people and individuals are appointed on the basis of merit that is free from bias and discrimination, okay? So that really would be our advice.
Brilliant, okay. And now the next question is actually for Tom. So must or should I get an AccessNI check if I want to employ someone?
Jonny, thanks for that question. The short answer to that is no. Which you'd probably find unusual for a civil servant to come out and give such a short answer. You know, we're trying to waffle on, but basically for some jobs and roles, there is a requirement to get an AccessNI basic check, which would disclose unspent convictions. So for example, if you want to join the Northern Ireland Civil Service, or you have a contract with the Northern Ireland Civil Service or some other public bodies, or in fact, if you work in certain parts of an airport, you will need, there will be a requirement there to get an AccessNI check. In some other jobs or roles, the employer themselves has decided that a basic check is required. So in Northern Ireland, people who deliver food through some of the new companies such as Just Eat and people like that, the employer there does ask for a basic check. Amazon drivers is another one where we know that a basic check is required. Also then, for those people who work closely with children or in situations where an adult is particularly vulnerable, an employer will on most occasions require an enhanced AccessNI check. And that's because they want to, that's because there's a requirement there to safeguard children and vulnerable adults. Some employers decide that they do want to know about past criminal history information. And instead of using an AccessNI check, sometimes they use a self-declaration process. This is all about ban the box, and what we're trying to do is move away from the idea that you tick a box and that someone's automatically excluded because they've ticked the box to say that they have convictions without any look at what those convictions are, whether they're relevant to the role, whether they're relevant to the job that people are applying for. So an employer in deciding whether they want to get an AccessNI check will look and determine for themselves, how important is it for me to understand a person's criminal history? What type of business am I in? Is this essential for my reputation? What's the cost of it? And then they will make a decision as to whether an AccessNI check is appropriate in those circumstances or not.
Thank you very much, Tom. And don't forget to keep putting any questions that you might have for us as it comes up in the chat directly to Deborah, and she'll come in then and anonymously ask the questions for us. So, Sara, over to you.
Okay, so I've got one here. And I think it's probably a dual answer, probably for Tom and Jonny as well. So how long in duration can or should a conviction information be held, for example, risk assessments for appointees?
Do you want to start, Jonny, and then I'll come in and talk specifically about AccessNI checks?
Yes, absolutely. So we had a meeting with the Information Commission office before the pandemic hit, and obviously people are quite concerned about GDPR and what you can and can't keep. And so they talked about a number of options. Obviously, anything to do with criminal records is private, personal, sensitive data. And we have to be very careful that, we keep it in a secure locked filing cabinet or password protected or whatever. And it should not be ever leaked out to general staff or outside the organization. In terms of keeping notes on possibly where someone's done a risk assessment, the one thing they'd suggest is to maybe anonymize information or to keep it separate from the staff file, much the way you would keep monitoring information separate. I think it will depend completely. I mean, they couldn't give us a definitive answer because it depends on your funders, it depends on, your business practices, but you may need to keep some records for longer than others. But I think the main thing is that you sort of answer the main questions of GDPR. Why am I keeping this? How long am I keeping this for? And again, you go back, and I mean, this is something I can go through with an organization if they would like as a free service, just to look at your policies and procedures. But yes, there is a fine line between keeping too much and too little. For example, there may be a requirement to keep staff files for 5 years after the person has left the organization, just in case there was any need to do any historic investigation or anything like that. But yeah, just being very careful that you aren't keeping too much information. And I think Tom is going to come back in now and talk about the AccessNI certificates in particular.
Yes, thanks, Jonny. If you do actually receive AccessNI certificates as part of your employment process, the AccessNI Code of Practice is very clear on this, in that if you do receive information as an employer which is disclosed on an AccessNI certificate, it should only be retained to the point where an employment decision is being taken. After that, the information should no longer be held because you've used the information for the purpose for which you've got it, which is to make an employment decision. And you shouldn't therefore then be photocopying that information, for example, and keeping it in somebody's personnel file. The other thing we do require under the AccessNI Code of Practice, and Jonny's already referred to this, is when you're in possession of that information, you must keep it securely. And there are sample policies within our website about how information should be retained. There is one exception to this, and that is unless you're under a statutory duty to share information with, for example, a government department. And the example I would use there is if you run childcare premises and you have to get AccessNI certificates on staff in the childcare premise, and those certificates have information on them, criminal history information or other information, they must be shared with social services. There's a statutory requirement for you to do that. But beyond that, the rule of thumb that we would say, and what is in our code of practice, is that once you take the recruitment decision based on, and partly based on the AccessNI certificate, you should no longer retain that document.
Thank you, Tom. Deborah, do we have any questions at the moment?
Yes, we do. First question has actually been asked for Sara, and it says, have you worked with placing ex-offenders in a social care organisation, and what advice would you give them?
Right. Currently, no, I haven't worked with people placing them in a social care, well, not within business in the community. When in my previous experience, I had certainly placed people with social care in social care environments. And I would definitely recommend that they do exactly what we've talked about. It is about looking at the regulations, looking at the statutory requirement. If you have a criminal conviction, consider what that is. You yourself will know whether you are allowed to work in a social care setting or if you're not. Social care settings, it'll be something they will have to ask about disclosures to make sure that people are allowed to work in that particular setting. And I would say be honest, be upfront. Have a conversation with the person in the HR department or whoever's doing the interview or recruitment process, and just have an honest conversation. Depending on what your conviction is, it may or it may not impact upon that particular role, but that's the time to have the conversation, and don't try and hide it, because ultimately if there's something there that's going to come up and bite you, you want to be kind of ahead of the game. So just be honest and upfront, and make sure you have those conversations and that you understand any restrictions that you have placed on you before you go into that particular environment.
Thank you, Sara.
Could I just jump in on that one as well? I suppose I've helped a number of people just to go for NISP registration who would have a criminal record, and I've found NISP to be very, very fair and balanced. And we had a meeting with a recruitment company for the care sector, social work, social care, about 2 weeks ago, myself and Deborah, and they were actually talking about the fact that a lot of people assume they're excluded from social care work because they may have had a conviction, and it may be something from like 15, 20 years ago for criminal damage when they were 15, but they're sort of convinced that, this means they can never work in social care. But what I would say is just, if you are recruiting in social care, just to kind of have your policies worked out and communicate that with people, so you don't end up missing out on somebody who has a very, very trivial minor conviction from a very long time ago, and they would be a brilliant member of staff, and just because of the assumption is, they can't work there, they may never apply. So it'd be good if you're recruiting in any area you're recruiting in, just to try and be as open and honest with your candidates, your applicants as possible, as to what your kind of thresholds are, and that's very helpful for everybody involved, because it means you don't waste people's time and you don't waste your own time. So, Deborah, you're on mute.
Thank you, Jonny. This next question would be directed at Jonny and Tom. And I support a lot of young people who are trying to get a placement and part-time jobs. They often don't know or fully understand what's on their record. Can they access this information before they apply or at the AccessNI stage?
Tom, I'll let you go first on that one.
Well, yeah, the short answer is yes, you can, but it wouldn't be through, well, you could do it through AccessNI, but the most efficient way to understand what's on a young person's criminal record is for them to ask for a subject access check from the Police Service of Northern Ireland. It costs £10, and the Police Service of Northern Ireland will be able to tell you what information is held about you by the police service. You can apply for a basic AccessNI check for any reason whatsoever, and it would provide you with details of unspent convictions. But that's not much use, for example, if you wanted a job, as Sarah's just talked about, in social care, because it's what we call an enhanced conviction, and we provide unspent and spent convictions. So my advice would be a subject access check from PSNI. I'm not sure, Jonny, if that's the sort of thing that you would talk about as well.
Yes, absolutely. And just to say that employers can't ask to see a DAT1 or a subject access request, that it would be for the person themselves. It's a private piece of information, and it's not, it's not to circumvent the AccessNI process. It wouldn't be acceptable for an employer to ask somebody to get a subject access request and to give it into the employer. Is that fair enough, Tom? Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Thanks very much. The next question would be directed at Jonny or Sara. I recruit healthcare staff. At what stage should the declaration of criminal conviction be ideally sent out for an applicant and for me as a recruiter. This organisation obviously do enhanced access checks as well as part of their process.
Leave that to you, Sara. You're on mute. Don't you love
I think
Zoom?
by now, after a year of doing these things, you'd remember to switch the mute off. But anyway, here we go. One of the things with Ban the Box that we're recommending, and it's in all cases, is that you assess that person or every person for the role based on their skills, their attitude, and their aptitude for the role. And it's only once you've done that and you've measured everybody fairly, you're using your usual recruitment process of interview or whatever you do, and once you've identified who the right person is for the role, is at that point at offer stage that you would do things subject to references, subject to checks, and that's the time that I would suggest that you go out and do your checks, because then you have made sure that there's nothing getting in the way of ensuring and assessing the right person and the candidates you have for that role. Nothing gets in the way of that. Then you do your checks, you come back. If there's something then on your enhanced disclosure, which because of the healthcare, that's what you would be doing, then you can have that conversation about what to get some more detail, because quite often what's on the enhanced disclosure is black and white, it's fact, but you may want to have that person in at that point for a chat or a telephone conversation to get a little bit more detail about what that conviction actually means, the circumstances, what's happened since, you know, anything at all that may have mitigating circumstances, for you then to make a genuine risk assessment about whether that person is still going to be okay for the role, or whether because of the conviction and the circumstances and the processes you've put in place, that person is no longer suitable for that role. And if, when you're doing your recruitment at every stage, on your website, in your recruitment pack, you make it crystal clear at what point you're going to be asking about convictions and what, you know, what's acceptable and what's not. So there's no grey areas, there's no surprises, nothing sprung upon anybody, that everybody will know that at offer stage a check will be done, and it gives that person and the applicants the opportunity to make their case and identify if there's the right person for the role, whether they want to step away from the process at that stage because they know that their conviction is not going to kind of get past a check, or if they know that they have got a conviction but with a disclosure and a conversation that can be explained and it may well be acceptable for the organisation. So that's what I would suggest, and that's what Ban the Box is looking at suggesting and recommending.
Can I add just one thing, Sara, to what you've said, and just not so much from an AccessNI point of view, but just in general terms, particularly if you're going to employ someone in a social care setting or whatever, it may be useful at an early stage to ask an individual, or to make it known that if that individual is not allowed to work with adults or children, that you're upfront about that as well, that this job involves that, and give the individual an opportunity to take themselves out of the recruitment process if they in fact cannot work in those areas.
Yeah, and that would be specifically in terms of the barred list for children and vulnerable adults. There are certain people who are barred from working with those groups, and even applying for a job in regulated activity is actually a criminal offence. But anybody who's on the barred list should know they're on the barred list, because it would have been written out to by DBS. Just to give a kind of a practical example of how that works in the real world in terms of checks. So Deborah works for me. When we were recruiting for Deborah's role, we put out an ad. We said we're recruiting for an employment engagement officer. We are going to do an enhanced AccessNI check on the person that we wish to offer the job to, and it must be satisfactory. So we didn't say it had to be clear. We just said it had to be satisfactory, that we were satisfied that the person was able to do the job if something came back. So when we shortlisted, we had 30 applicants, we shortlisted 10. During the shortlisting, we didn't have any idea if anybody had a criminal record, so we could never be accused of bias. We also weren't collecting 30 people's criminal record history, which we then become a GDPR collector and responsible for. We did the interviews. During the interview stages, we did not know if any of the candidates had a conviction, and eventually we settled on Deborah as the best candidate. And then at that point, we sent Deborah off to get her enhanced check done, and then that came through. So as you can see, we processed one person's criminal record information there rather than processing 30. So that's just a practical example there.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Jonny. Another question for Tom. What is the stance on checking ID during the pandemic? For example, not in person via electronic submissions?
Yeah, Deborah, we've had this question a few times. We've relaxed the rules in relation to ID checking. ID checking can be done remotely by sending in copy documents initially. But what we do always recommend is that when the person starts, that as soon as possible, somebody checks the original identity documents that that person has and matches them up with the copy documents that have already been considered by the employer. So there is a relaxation there because of the pandemic. That can be done in a number of ways. You can send in copies. If you're doing a Zoom call like this, you could ask people to hold up the identification to the camera, and providing you can make out the various bits and pieces on it and make out photographs and stuff like that, that's perfectly acceptable as well. But what we always say is that sometime and as soon as possible after the person starts, that somebody physically checks their original identity documents to make sure that they match the identity documents that have been, the copy identity documents that have been provided at interview stage.
Thanks very much, Tom. This question is directed at Roisin. Whilst we know there can be oh, you there, Roisin? Yeah. Okay. Whilst we know there can
Hello,
be unfair you're on mute.
How you doing?
I'm not sorry, that wasn't me speaking. I think it was someone else.
Oh, apologies. While we know there can be unfair treatment in the recruitment process for people with convictions, we also can see unfair treatment of people with convictions trying to access maybe further education. What is the best way to approach maybe a college or a training provider who seem to refuse individuals access to any courses as soon as they disclose their conviction?
Well, I suppose what I should say is you have to remember that currently having a criminal conviction, it's not actually currently covered by our equality legislation. So I definitely would not be able to provide advice on that one. Our advice around all of this in an employment context is really good practice advice. The advice that we give for all equality areas, Deborah, but because it's not currently covered as a protected characteristic under equality law, I wouldn't want to give any advice on that because I don't have a remit. However, I'm sure that Jonny, Tom or Sara could probably give some advice on how to approach that one.
Thank you. Can we open it to the panel?
What I can say from an AccessNI point of view is that there is a requirement within the code of practice again. If someone has a conviction on their AccessNI certificate, and as a result of that you are thinking that I don't think I can offer this person this job or this place on a course or whatever it might be, there is a requirement to have a conversation with that person so that they can perhaps explain the background to the criminal conviction. Because don't forget, on an AccessNI certificate, all you get is the bare facts. You get the date of the conviction, you get what the conviction was for, and you get the disposal that was given at court. But there can be a story behind that that can mean that, in fact, this person is perfectly suitable to go on this course or to take on this job. And so you should always have that conversation and give them the opportunity to explain the background of the conviction, what actually happened. And you can then make an assessment for yourself whether what you're being told by that person matches the type of information that is on the criminal record check. So for example, if it was a period of imprisonment and someone was telling you it was a very minor thing, well, you would know that there's a discrepancy between what they're saying and what the conviction is. But if the explanation sounds convincing to you, if you can see that someone has actually done something or can prove that they have done something to move their life on from that conviction, the question I would want to ask is, well, why would you want to deny that person an opportunity to come onto your course or to be employed by you or to volunteer for you when they clearly, as been said many times before, they're the best candidate. You have interviewed lots of people. This is the person that you really want to take. And the only thing that seems to be preventing you from doing it is the fact that they have a criminal conviction, which is giving you some cause for concern. Have the conversation with them. try and find out more about what actually happened, and only then make your decision as to whether this person is suitable or unsuitable for either the employment opportunity, the volunteering opportunity, or the course.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Tom, just a wee bit of clarification just around the ID has come in here about staff starting a job, but they're still working from home. So you may not have the opportunity to meet that individual in person for a number of months again after starting inductions and undertaking via Teams and Zoom. So just a wee bit of clarification around the ID.
I think what we always say to employers is, don't forget you're bringing this person into your business or to volunteer. You're bringing this person into your business, so you're going to want to doubly check they are who they say they are. And that's why we have these identity requirements. So what we would say to you is, as soon as possible after the person starts, it doesn't have to be on the first day, but as soon as possible, that somebody checks the physical identity documents and that you make some arrangements to enable that to happen. Whatever they may be, and it may be that you for that particular purpose you may have to have a face-to-face meeting with the individual and ask them to bring their identity documents to that meeting, and you do it in a socially distanced and safe way. But I just go back to the point that this is somebody you have employed. You want to make sure they are who they say they are, and they're not somebody different, and that you've given AccessNI the fullest information to enable a check to be carried out, or an accurate check to be carried out against someone's criminal record history.
I mean, Tom, in conversations we've had, you've mentioned to me that actually sometimes people do use somebody else's identity, maybe a family member or something, to try and avoid. Is that true? Or
yeah, that's right. I mean, criminal records, for example, aren't changed because someone changes their name or updates their address or whatever. So it's vitally important that we have as much information as we possibly can. And yes, there is a tendency in Northern Ireland to use family members' names. If you're stopped by the police or whatever, we've seen instances of that where criminal records have had to be merged because siblings have sort of used their identity, each other's identity at different times. So yes, it is important that people check that the person who's coming to work, volunteer, whatever for them, is who they say they are. And it's such an important part of the AccessNI process. We can't emphasize identity checking enough.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. We have a question for Vicky. Vicky, how have you found the process of employing people with convictions?
Well, thanks. Well, certainly for us, a large part of the process is actually partnering with the NIACRO just to really use their expertise. For everyone who's on the call, I would really recommend a Seeing is Believing tour, or going to one of NIACRO's employment events. That's really where we got started. So we went to Lavery to an employment fair, and that's where I met Jonny. And that's really where we started. And for me, this was something completely new for the company, and for the company, it was completely new. So going to that employment fair really helped open up our eyes and to kind of see the talent actually that's out there, the untapped talent that's out there, and the fact that we can help give these individuals opportunities, and the skills, the skill set there is fantastic. The training that they get, all the skills that they develop, whether they are within a prison facility or they're outside, is brilliant. So that's real untapped talent for us, and we do have kind of opportunities that are really suited to them. So that's where we got started. In terms of our experience, definitely flexibility is key. Making sure that you're flexible. Rehabilitation is a long process, and there's a lot of things other than work involved and other than employment. The key for us was really to make sure that individuals got money in their pockets and had somewhere to live nearby the work site, where they could take full advantage of having the employment opportunity, and the fact that a bit of money in their pocket would help break that cycle. But there's a lot more going on in that individual's life. They're rebuilding relationships with their families. You know, there's tons there, and the fact that the employment opportunity is just one factor of that. So I think as an employer, we have to realize that there's this whole other side, and to make sure that we are being flexible. It's been hugely successful for us in terms of just taking a few small steps into this process, and we're starting to roll it out across our sites across the UK. So really what we've started in NI, we're using as a model elsewhere. It didn't really take much more in terms of resource. The staff that we have, we ensured that there were buddy systems and there were mentors for individuals coming on site. The person is not always directly employed through ourselves, so sometimes they are employed through a subcontractor, and that's where the buddy system really kicks in. So we made sure that one of our member of staff are buddying up with that individual to make sure that they're looked after and they're cared for, making sure that all their needs are met. So there's quite a lot of basic needs there that just need covered, and making sure they have access for lunch, dinner, you know, everything's they've got breakfast before they come to site, just all those basic needs. So that's the buddy system, where a site agent will watch over that person while they're on site and make sure that those needs are met. But for us, it has been hugely successful. We've just opened the door. We're ready to do more as things open up again. Obviously, COVID has hit us, and we're not allowed to bring too many people onto site who are outside our normal workforce. But once things open up, we hope to make a lot more positive steps. And I would also say that there are other ways to get involved as well in terms of your general business. And that is Mugshots.NI actually is a great way to incorporate a circular economy, and to make sure that, you know, you're spending, if you are getting promotional materials or marketing materials, that's an easy step to help in a rehabilitation process. Those young people are helping make printed materials, pop-up stands. I would really recommend that is a step that you take as well, and that's something that we've started to do. So hugely positive for us anyway, our experience. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to jump in to say, maybe Sarah, what your experience has been with other employers.
I think I completely agree with you, Vicky. And as you said, seeing as leaving visits are something that we're really keen to get organised for Ban the Box. We're in discussion with the prisons to try and enable that to happen as soon as possible and as soon as things open up. Obviously, those in the prisons themselves want to keep themselves as safe as they possibly can with the COVID situation. But it is definitely top of our list of activities that we will be encouraging to happen as soon as it is possible to do so. But as Vicky has also mentioned, there are so many different organisations that work within prisons and work with people who have come out of prison in community organisations to help support them and reduce reoffending situations. Vicky has mentioned Advantage and Mugshots. The work that they do within Hyde Bank Prison is fantastic. And I would fully encourage you to go on their website and have a look at the activities they're doing and help those young people to actually develop some skills and possible job opportunities for when they are released. So 100% agree with everything that Vicky's just said there.
Thanks very much, Sarah. That's great. I have another AccessNI question, if I could direct to Tom. Tom, how often should an AccessNI be carried out? So, for example, if someone has an AccessNI carried out for one organisation, can this also be carried to another organisation if it is a similar role?
The short answer is yes, it could. It could be used for that purpose. However, it's something that we don't recommend in AccessNI, because at the minute, when an AccessNI disclosure is issued, it just has information up to that point in time. That information could change between the issue of the previous certificate and the new employment or volunteering opportunity being offered. It may be for a slightly different role. It could be, for example, if we had to refer the check to PSNI, the original check to PSNI, if the role was slightly different, there may be a disclosure by PSNI on that role that wouldn't have been on the role before. So there is nothing in the legislation that would prevent someone using a previous AccessNI check, but we don't recommend it for a number of reasons, particularly because the information on it could have changed since the original certificate was issued, and the role may be slightly different. So it might be a similar role, but it may not be the identical role. And the position applied for is very important, because if we do have to refer an AccessNI applications to police, they look specifically at the position applied for, and they will only release information relevant to that position applied for. So if it changes slightly or somewhat, then there might be information that wasn't disclosed in the first certificate that may be disclosed on a subsequent certificate. So yes, it can be done. No, we don't recommend it.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, you're popular. I have another one. This person works in the youth charity sector. So they have used enhanced checks, and then they recheck every 3 years to make sure there's nothing new on the record. What is the best practice for holding or deleting the information so they don't need to re-ask the same questions again at each recheck? Or should they just repeat the process at every recheck and complete a new risk assessment?
I would suggest the latter, that they do a new risk assessment and redo the process right from the beginning again. Every 3 years is fine. It's entirely up to an employer or voluntary organisation how frequently they want to undertake the AccessNI checks. The most important thing is the risk. If you feel that you're in an area where there is a heightened level of risk, then you maybe want to check more frequently than you do if there's a lower level of risk. So for example, I would get a basic check to join the Northern Ireland Civil Service. It's a once and done thing. It's solely for recruitment, and the recruitment decision is made based on that and all the other things that the Civil Service would make a recruitment decision on, but they would never ask me to redo an AccessNI check on that basis. So it's really up to each employer to decide what they want to do, but my recommendation would be start the process from the beginning again.
So Tom, can I ask, the way you say you can't hold the actual certificate, could in secure notes, could you take a note of the information that was disclosed the first time, so that if you were to check again in 3 years' time?
Yes, you can, Johnny. What we do for those people who are registered with us, they have a queue of, they have an NI Direct account, and on that NI Direct account is a note of all the cases that they've processed. That can be downloaded to an Excel spreadsheet, and that Excel spreadsheet can be kept, so you can keep evidence of the fact that you have actually requested an AccessNI check and that it was issued to you on such and such a date for such and such a role. So you can keep that sort of information. What we're saying is you can't keep, if there is, for example, disclosure information on the certificate, that you shouldn't retain that beyond the point where you've made the recruitment decision, but you certainly can keep a record of the fact that you have obtained an AccessNI check, the date that you did that. And for those people who are registered with us, there is a facility on their NI Direct account to download that in an Excel spreadsheet and to permanently keep that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Vicky, this is a question for you. Does hiring someone with a criminal conviction require additional resources?
For us, it didn't require any additional resource. I think the main thing was that we used existing staff as mentors. So that was requiring some additional time, but it's time that we were willing to give and dedicate to ensuring that that person is cared for, whether on our sites. So the process really for us was that we would meet an individual and they would have one person as point of contact. So that would be a stakeholder engagement lead, which would be a job similar to mine on each of our sites. So that would be one of their support system. Then once they're actually on the site itself, they would have a site agent who would dedicate a bit of his time or her time to look after them whilst they're on site. They're normally placed with a subcontractor. So they're not a direct employee of ours, but we treat them as a direct employee. So it just took a bit of a additional resource in terms of time and mentoring, but not in terms of having to have additional staff to look after it or additional time in terms of admin or anything like that. there was no real added admin. It was just taking a bit of time, which we all have during the day, just to sit down with an individual and make sure that they're okay, have a chat with them, really look after their mental health as well, to make sure how are they fitting in, how are you settling in, how are you finding the work. And then they may go off to work on a different site, but we'll still keep in touch with them to see how they're getting on. So there's just that support network rather than any actual additional resources for us.
Thanks, Vicky. We're actually about to run out of time. I knew this would fly in, but it felt really fast. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who has participated today. We have just sent out a SurveyMonkey link, and in the next, as we're going to close off around past, but if anyone wants to just click into that and start to fill it in as we are finishing up. We hope you found today's session useful. As I said, we are going to follow up on all the questions that maybe we didn't get to and put together a resource for you guys. Also, myself and Sara will be running a workshop on the 26th of May that'll get into the details about the recruitment process and HR. My background's HR, and so we're looking at the kind of guiding HR managers and recruiters in how to kind of do things fairly. And just to remind you as well that if you want your Twitter handle mentioned today in our kind of boasty tweet about our event, just please drop the Twitter handle into the comments and chat, and we can do that. But I'm just going to hand back over to Sara now.
Yep, just really want to say thank you so much. Firstly to our panelists, Roisin, Tom and Vicky, for joining Jonny and I today on the session. Huge thank you to Deborah for managing the questions and the chat and making sure that all ran quite smoothly. And thank you to each and every one of you who have joined today and participated, listened in, asked questions and expressed an interest in the subject. We are really keen to make sure that the conversations are ongoing. If there's anything that you need from any one of us, then please do get in touch. The follow-up email will be coming out in the next couple of days with all the additional resources and things that people want. And obviously, if there's anything from that, please do get in touch. But a huge thank you to every single one of you for taking the time out this morning to join us, and I hope it's been valuable for you as well.
We've 3 minutes. Do we want to just do one final one?
Trust you. You always have to, don't you?
Deborah, hit us up.
I'll hit you with one. Well, this would be for yourself, Jonny. Actually, that's what you get for asking. If a person's conviction comes to light after they are employed, what is the general feeling amongst colleagues, and how should you deal with any repercussions?
Okay, I'll try and answer this in 3 minutes. So there's a couple of aspects to this. Obviously, GDPR is a big issue, and sometimes information does get out about people and that kind of thing. So I think whenever you're hiring somebody that has a criminal record, it's very, very advisable to do a sort of a plan for who's going to know in the organization, who's going to know what and when. Obviously a line manager might need to know, but for example, the canteen staff don't particularly need to know. And I suppose have those kind of conversations and plans in place. And we can send you out some guidance on this that'll help. But I suppose the main thing is just remember this is private personal information. And we have had cases taken to the Information Commission office where people have gossiped about criminal records in the workplace and said things about staff. You work out who needs to know, and the fallout of not doing that is sometimes when these things do come to light, and people can feel quite aggrieved that they didn't know. Say a line manager wasn't told, or a supervisor wasn't told, and they found out through somebody else. So again, it's just sitting down with your HR head on, thinking practically who needs to know, how am I going to tell them, and just to maybe document that somewhere as well, just in the HR file, that the decision was made to hire this person. It was felt that the site supervisor needs to know, but nobody else. Because we have had instances of people who have, something has come to light, and the staff member who probably should have been told wasn't told, and they've been quite upset about it. So again, it's just thinking through logically, defensible decision making, and just thinking through without going overboard and making announcements or sending out memos and that kind of thing. So I hope that kind of answered the question.
Can I just quickly add there that we have
Yeah.
got an employer toolkit as part of Ban the Box, is an employer toolkit that's been put together in conjunction with Roisin, Tom and Jonny, and it takes you right through the process of the things you need to consider when working with people convictions. If you go onto the Business and the Community Northern Ireland website, then there's a link into that toolkit that you can access, and I'll put a link into the information that's coming out as well. But there is a full process there for you to look through and consider, if that helps.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much.
And that's us bang on 11:30. So
Yeah,
well
there you
done,
go.
well done, Jonny.
And-
Thank you all again.
I was just going to say, Sara, I've got lots of people on the private chat just thanking us for today. I'll not have time to reply to you all, but yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Brilliant. We hope to see you again soon.
Great to see you all. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
I might stay on, Sara, for a post-mortem.
And
Do you want us to hang
stop
back?
record.
I'll stop recording. Yeah.
Yeah.